Hi, we are the team that will tell you about the planetary boundary called chemical pollution. As a brief introduction, I will first tell you about the Holocene, which in Latin is holos and means total, and the Anthropocene, which in Latin is anthropos and means humans related to human activity. This explanation is so that you have an idea of where the nine planetary boundaries come from and can understand them in a better way. In this slide, I will explain the parts of our presentation. So, in the first part, I will give you the definition of two concepts which are Holocene and Anthropocene. In the second part, I will give you the concept of what planetary boundaries are, why they were created, and who established them. I will also tell you what these planetary boundaries are and how many they are. In the third part, we will talk in deep about the planetary boundary called chemical pollution, its scientific definition, functioning, and consequences, etc. In the fourth part, we will talk about the relationship that chemical pollution has with the other 8 planetary boundaries. And in the fifth and last part, our conclusions will be given in the form of biological and moral issues. This is the one part called geological era. As I told you before, to understand a little about planetary boundaries, I will tell you a little about the Holocene and Anthropocene. Today, we find ourselves in a geological epoch called Holocene, in which we have been for 10,000 years. As you can see in this graph, the circle is the Holocene, which means stability, and is telling us that during these years our temperature is stable, but recently it is feared that we will enter the stage called Anthropocene, which means pressure of human activity on the earth, but it can also be a period where humans make a change to the earth system. This is the second part called What are planetary boundaries? After talking about this change, in 2009, a group of scientists from Stockholm University analyzed the relationship between humans and the environment and managed to perceive that we are in an era where it is necessary to achieve a transformative change if we don't want to deteriorate the environment. They published their work on the Ecology and Society page, where they established that there are 9 planetary boundaries or ways of measuring the global crisis, allowing us to have a safe space and stay in the Holocene as long as we don't exceed the limit. These are the 9 planetary limits. So, 1 is climate change, 2 is ocean acidification, 3 is stratospheric ozone depletion, 4 is disruption of the N and P cycle, 5 is global freshwater use, 6 is chemical pollution, 7 is atmospheric aerosol loading, 8 is rate of biodiversity loss, and 9 is land system change. So let's go to the next slide. Let me go to the explanation of this photo. In September of this year, a group of scientists managed to quantify for the first time the planetary boundaries that I just named. But not only that, they also concluded that 6 of these boundaries have been exceeded, which can generate disasters or irreversible change in the planet. So in this photo, you can see the limits that have been transgressed. And the part where you see a world is the limit. So as far as you see green was the limit, and the red part means that we exceeded it by a lot, and it could be irreparable damage. But this time, my team and I will only focus on one of the nine planetary boundaries, which is called chemical pollution, which will be explained below.
Chemical pollution refers to the contamination of our environment with chemicals that are not there naturally. But how big is the problem of chemical pollution and how does it affect our health and our environment? Chemicals are everywhere in the food we eat, the air we breathe, the products we use, etc. During the manufacture, storage, transport, and disposal, chemicals can leak into the surrounding environment. Harmful chemicals can get into our bodies if we breathe them, eat them, drink them, or are absorbed by our skin. Some of the most harmful chemicals are forever chemicals that get into our bodies and environment and do not break in, and hormone disrupting chemicals that block, mimic, or disrupt our natural hormones with dire consequences. Chemical pollution can affect the delicate balance of the earth. To really understand the true impact of a chemical, it is important to know how it's used and where it's found. But today, the chemical composition of materials and products, as well as the emissions into the environment, remain largely unknown. Based on the nine limits, chemical pollution and atmospheric aerosol loading are the two only boundaries that are not known. What we do know is that man made chemicals have been found in some of the most remote parts of our planets, and recent research suggests the level of chemical pollution has crossed a planetary boundary, and we need urgent action to ensure a stable ecosystem. Let's talk about causes and consequences. Some of the causes are, most of the time, by humans. There are a few chemical materials caused by volcanoes or some natural stuff. Most of the consequences are high levels of toxicity, chronic diseases, unpredictable chemical reactions, and biochemical accumulation. As we know, chemical pollution haven't been calculated, so we cannot be for sure where we are on the boundaries. But it is a fact that it does exist, so we have to do something so it doesn't destroy our planet. Some things we can do to prevent the growth of chemical pollution is individually to buy only as much as chemical products as we need. Use household chemicals and products before they go bad or reach the expiration date. Give away things such as paint and chemical to people who will use them. Recycle, reuse, or donate liquids from automobiles. Try to take rides for work, school, parties, etc., so there is less air pollution caused by vehicles. As a planet. As a planet, we should stop making unnecessary stuff that just contaminates the air and water and try to work on an alternative for fabrics to stop throwing away so much pollution and recycle as much as it is possible.
Now, how does this boundary relate to the other eight? We know that the boundary we're talking about is chemical pollution. So first, I'm going to explain how does chemical pollution relate to climate change. Firstly, we know that the chemical industry is one of the industry that produces the most greenhouse emission. According to Women's Voices of the Earth, the chemical industry is responsible for 43% of greenhouse emissions in the USA from the 1990s to 2019. And as we know, greenhouse emissions, their effect on climate change is that they basically trap the heat within the earth, and well, this directly relates to climate change and the warming of the earth. Moving on to the second planetary boundary, which is biodiversity loss. When species in the environment are left exposed to certain toxic chemicals and chemical pollutants. Also, chronic exposure to certain toxic chemicals can lead to changes in some species reproduction, in their mating, in the whole process that makes them themselves and what they do to help our ecosystems and environments. It disrupts that process for them, and it also weakens their neurological systems, which also can lead them to not cope as well with stressors, which one stressor can be climate change. And as a result from these prolonged exposure, they some species, plants, animals, marine, aquatic, or terrestrial, wildlife can't cope as well as they probably would because of these pollutants. As far as nitrogen and phosphorus cycles are concerned, I'd, cons- I'd, co- I'd consider them mainly a part of chemical pollutants because right now, firstly, nitrogen, we are using it for fertilizers and food production, which in this moment we are producing a lot of in regions where it's not supposed to grow. So we're taking more nitrogen than we can like let out, and we are currently more than doubling the natural rate of drawing down the nitrogen from the atmosphere into the biosphere, and it's not all taken by the crops. So a lot of it ends up in our environment, in the earth, in several other parts, which it's a pollutant and it's a greenhouse emission as well. Relating to phosphorus, phosphorus is used in the same industry, just in a different level. It's being used to prepare lands for crops, and after it's been used to do that, it goes into our rivers, our oceans, very local bodies of water. And when it does that, the biodiversity rates get lower, they decrease, and they also bring more like algae. And the algae, when algae die, they starve the water of oxygen, which ends up killing the fish there. Everything there basically dies. So it's called a dead zone. So it's another form of a chemical pollutant and a disrupted cycle. And lastly, to freshwater use. It's not so much related as to how we're going to limit the freshwater use, but it's related to what the freshwater contains, because as chemical pollutants are not being disposed, well, all of them are not being disposed correctly. They end up in fresh water, in oceans, and then this fresh water is being excessively used by humans. And also, when it does that, it can be, for example, if it's sewage water with a lot of chemical pollutants, it can be properly treated because the treatment plants are not equipped to do that. But it relates because if the excessive water we're using has a lot of chemical pollutants, that reflects directly on our health. Now, for the second part of the planetary boundaries. Chemical pollutants also relate to deforestation because we all know that every ecosystem and everything on the earth is connected. And if certain chemicals which are polluting the earth and are not being disposed of correctly are left, and some maybe pesticides and affect some of the natural earth's forests are left out in the open close to a forest or within a forest. This can cause this can induce the deforestation and make all the trees, like their leaves are gonna fall out and the trees are eventually going to die. So that's what happens with chemical pollutants and deforestation. Marine pollutants such as heavy oils and metals can decrease the water's photosynthesis, rate and increase the respiration rate of marine organisms, which directly facilitates ocean acidification to varying degrees, which is stated by the National Institute of Health. And we can see how water and marine chemical pollutants affect the acidification of the ocean. Regarding to the ozone layer, the holes in the ozone layer are directly caused by air pollutants, which include chlorofluorocarbons, which, when in touch with the ozone layer, release chlorine atoms. And when the chlorine atoms get in touch with the ozone, they destroy it completely. A single atom of chlorine can destroy thousands of ozone molecules. And finally, aerosols are basically a form of air pollution which again damages the ozone layer and directly related they're a chemical pollutant because well they're made of chemicals and the tiny molecules they release they can damage ourselves our they get in our lungs in our tissue they damage our lungs and they can damage as well the ozone layer the trees they can damage basically everything that air pollution does but like coming from an aerosol. So we basically can see how all the nine planetary boundaries are connected and how ours particularly, well as well as all the other connects and relates to every single one of them. Lastly, we're going to be presenting the bioethical issue and how it will be analyzed according to what we've seen in class. We think that a very important thing to remember in this case is the term rights of nature, which means we have to voice the nature's rights as people who speaking up for the environment who does not have a voice, but we need to be clear on what its rights are and what its rules and boundaries should be. Firstly, we have to think about that. Then we have to think about the fact that the benefits are not outweighing the risks in how we're proceeding to live life as of the 21st century. We as people are just getting used to the comfort and we're living in a consumerist society which does not have in mind the risks that this is producing to the environment which is our collective home and which provides for us everything we need in order to survive. According to the report, it should also have autonomy, which means that we should not be treating the environment as a means to an end, that we should be treating it as an individual and as a part of the system we're all cohabiting in, which we are not doing right now. We are treating it as a means to an end. We're taking everything we can from the planet and exploiting it, not just everything we can, but we're making progress, but we're making progress in with the human development in our minds instead of global development and environmental development. We're just destroying the environment, which, as well as I already said, the ben- it doesn't outweigh the risks, and it isn't also giving autonomy towards the environment. Another important thing to notice is that in this case, the environment doesn't have a way out because since we're the ones causing the damage, we're the ones who need to resolve it and deal with the consequences because nature can heal itself only to a certain level. It cannot heal itself after all the human caused and man made damage that we've made. We also need to think and choose what's right and what's wrong and we need to think that the earth is our planet and how we'd like to take care of it. Another thing to consider is that if we would think of earth as an experiment and we were watching everything that is happening in this earth and what the humans are doing to it and what's happening and how far over the limit they've gone, like we've gone, we would have already stepped in and made some changes to stop this from happening, which is what some humans are expecting to happen, something magical to just reverse our damage. And if we think about it like that, we have to reflect and we have to reflect within ourselves and take action, because this may be a bioethical issue, but it's also a responsibility for everyone. Create certain rules and limits and not go over them, as the nine planetary boundaries are, but they are just reflecting what we've already done. We need to establish some limits and some serious regulations for this. Thank you.